It's kind of what
I have friends. I just don't get what our.
Hey, I'm with you. There was a founding father who said,
No, we
like,
got
peaceable
Yeah.
trade or peaceable relations with all, entangling alliances with none. I'm cool with like being friends with everybody.
Gentlemen and gentlemen, I don't think we have a lady here.
All right.
I don't see.
We got some strong views.
Now we're getting started. You're on the record because we're recording the whole process for perpetuity, for the posterity to admire us.
Hard right.
Welcome to the Geopolitical Forum.
The agitated.
Uh,
I'm not agitated,
Welcome to the Geopolitical Forum.
as long as it's well presented.
We are, please, I will. Welcome, how many times do I have to say, welcome to the Geopolitical Forum?
You speak quiet.
I'm Eric Mao, the founding partner of the Geopolitical Forum.
Owner. Oh, shut up.
Geopolitics is life.
He's chairman of this meeting, so you can hold him chairman now.
Yeah, that title has been taken, so I'll settle with the lesser one. So geopolitics is life, especially the time we live in. We're going from, I will submit, we're going from a unipolar kind of world order to multipolar world order, because the time the US is the sole predominant power is kind of going away. We're entering into a new era where multiple powers will share the world stage. That reminds me of in the past, like when people lived in the time of the turning point of Roman Empire, or the inflection point of Athenian Empire, or Spanish Empire, and the beginning of the end of the British Empire, those times. So we're kind of living in that time in the American Empire, kind of comparable. Also, we need to be concerned about, well, I wouldn't want to be a fearmonger, but there's this thing called Thucydides trap, right? That we have to take that into consideration. So we're not totally isolated in the heartland of America, in Chicago. Although the country seems to be insulated by oceans, but hey, it'll get to us. That's why geopolitics is life. That's why we're here to talk about the time we live in. Multipolarity is rising. So today's topic is multipolarity. How can we best educate our ruling class? So we want to, since it's a historical trend, it's going to get there. We're going to get multipolarity, no matter how. Because if you believe it, it's historical trend. There will be other power rising. Be peer of the U.S. is not necessarily adversary. So we want to have a soft landing as opposed to a hard landing. That's why we need to get the messages across to our leaders, to the ruling class, so they can make a proper decision. So we can somehow have a soft landing, kind of reasonable one, instead of marking things off and have a hard landing unnecessarily. That's really dumb, in my book. So it's my pleasure that we have Dr. David Ramsay Steele here to share his insights and his view on this important time of the country and for all of us. Dr. David Ramsay Steele is Supreme Leader of the Chicago Libertarian Seminar, whose monthly discussions can now be viewed on YouTube, along with all the geopolitical forum stuff. And I started going to the Chicago Libertarian Seminar in November 24, and I have never missed 1 month since. And I always why? Because I always considered the highlight of my month. Even if I had gotten married in that month and gone to a paradise on earth for honeymoon, that seminar is still the highlight of my month. So Dr. Steele is the author of Conquistador, right? With his pens down, David Ramsay Steele's legendary Laws Lectures, published in 2024. The Mystery of Fascism, David Ramsay Steele's Greatest Hits, 2019. Orwell, Your Orwell, A Worldview on the Slab, published in 2017. And Atheism Explained, From Folly to Philosophy, 2008. And From the Marx to Mises, Post-Capitalist Society and the Challenge of Economic Calculation, 1992. He's co-author with Dr. Michael R. Edelstein of Therapy Breakthrough, Why Some Psychotherapies Work Better Than Others, 2013. And 3-Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, published in 1997 and a later version published in 2019. So today, Dr. Steele will have a about 30-minute presentation. Then afterwards, it's open to the floor is open to the audience, where you can present your statements, comments, and rebuttals, and question and answer. So without further ado, Dr. Steele.
Thank you, Chairman Mao. I'd like to begin by reading a passage from Adam Smith from his Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. It would be best if I read it in a Scottish accent, actually, but I didn't trust myself. So here it is in a sort of conglomerate English accent. At the particular time, oh yes, I should explain. He's just been talking about two great breakthroughs in Europe's impact on the world, the discovery of America and the discovery of the sea route to the Far East, and the repercussions of those two breakthroughs. So the quotation is, at the particular time that these discoveries were made, the superiority of force happened to be so great on the side of the Europeans that they were enabled to commit with impunity every sort of injustice to those remote countries. Hereafter, perhaps, the natives of those countries may grow stronger, or those of Europe may grow weaker, and the inhabitants of all the different quarters of the globe may arrive at that equality of courage and force, which, by inspiring mutual fear, can alone overawe the injustice of independent nations into some sort of respect for the rights of one another. But nothing seems more likely to establish this equality of force than that mutual communication of knowledge and of all sorts of improvements, which an extensive commerce from all countries to all countries naturally, or rather necessarily, carries along with it. So that was Adam Smith. It's slightly tentative or even hesitant, but the gist is clear. Smith is conjecturing a possible future time when, due to the spread of initially European technology and knowledge generally, other countries will start to catch up with Europe, and they will overcome the weaknesses which enable the Europeans to commit atrocities in their dealings with these other cultures. It's clear from the whole context that Smith believed that the natural development of market capitalism, which is what I'm going to call it, that's not a phrase that Smith ever used, of course, a market order characterized by Smith's famous invisible hand, would automatically undermine the privileged position of a few superpowers, so that the power and influence of all countries would become more evenly correlated with population. This, I think, is a remarkable vision of the future, and I think it's fundamentally correct. So, to bring us up to date, the share of world GDP due to the United States in 1960, the US share of world GDP was 40%. In other words, 40% of the value of goods and services produced in the world was produced in the United States of America. Today, that number is 15%. And it falls every year, simply because other countries in the world are developing, are industrializing, as we used to say. They're acquiring technology and eventually becoming, as we see spectacularly with China, creators of new technology. And this is enabling them to catch up with the West, catch up with you. And the West really means Europe and the outposts of Europe, like the United States of America. GDP, which is the same thing as national income, which is the same thing as national output, which is the same thing as national spending. They're all the same, by definition, have to be the same quantity. It can be measured in two ways. Traditionally, it was measured, if you're comparing one country with another, it was measured by looking at the international exchange rates. So whatever the dollar was exchanging for the ruble would give you the equivalent if you try to calculate the comparative GDP. Generally speaking, most economists think that PPP, or purchasing power parity, is a more accurate assessment and comparison of different countries' output. So according to PPP, number one country in the world today is China in terms of its GDP. Number two, and some way behind and falling further behind every year, is the USA. Number three is India. And number four is Russia, which recently overtook both Japan and Germany. It's generally expected that Russia will soon be overtaken in that ranking by Indonesia, although presumably the current war, which has absolutely devastated many East Asian countries like Indonesia, because they can't get oil, that will slow down the rate at which Indonesia will overtake Russia as number four. Now, these are total GDP, not GDP per capita. So if you have to divide by the population to get the GDP per capita, so the United States is way ahead of China still in GDP per capita. So it's like 4 or 5 times that of China. So that's just some illustrative figures to show that what Smith predicted is happening. Now, Smith didn't say how long he thought this would take for all countries in the world to be caught up and to be and for output to be more or less proportional to population. But we're nearly 2.5 centuries later than Smith, and we can see this inevitable process moving rapidly towards a kind of equilibrium. Now, I am an Adam Smith liberal. I believe in market capitalism. I believe there is no alternative to market capitalism if you want high living standards for the masses, or if you want to be able to wage a modern war. You have to have market capitalism. So that's my view, and I'll defend it if anybody wants to criticize it. Now, of course, no one would say that GDP is perfectly correlated with political power in the world or military capability, but also equally clearly, it is a significant variable. If your GDP goes up, your ability to wage war goes up. Other things being equal. It's a fairly obvious point that that countries that used to be discussed in development economics with the phrase the advantages of backwardness. Countries can have higher rates of growth potentially if they start from a comparatively low position. I can remember in the 1960s, I was a Marxist, and I had arguments with other Marxists, and I found a curious fact that they would keep talking about the third world and neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism and things like this. And they seem to be oblivious to the fact that the third world would eventually catch up with the first world, or that there was any tendency in this direction. They ruled it out, and that was because they'd read Lenin's theory of imperialism, which is seriously erroneous. And so they thought of the third world as being trapped in poverty forever. And this has never been true. It was Blinken's view. And today it's obvious that there is hardly a third world anymore. And what there is of a third world is rapidly turning into a first world. And of course, the second world, meaning the Soviet bloc, has gone away completely. So I'll just mention two big turning points in the acceptance of market capitalism as the only possible, the only feasible future way of organizing an economy. Beginning in 1978, under Deng Xiaoping, China began to embrace market capitalism. In stages after 1991, the Russian Federation embraced market capitalism to such an extent that when Vladimir Putin was interviewed publicly by Tucker Carlson, Putin said to Carlson, but he was not talking to Carlson, he knew that Carlson was a dangerous fellow. He was addressing the West generally. He said, we're just as bourgeois as you. Truer word was never said. So you have in Russia and China two societies predominantly guided by market capitalism. And in both countries, we've had rapid growth. In China, amazing, spectacular growth of over 10% a year for many years. But Russia has had healthy growth as well. And they had one bad year last year because they had an inflation problem. And they are, in my view, oversensitive to inflation. They clamped down, increased the interest rate to over 20%, and put a stop to inflation, but at the cost of a little bit of a recession. So these are some of the developments. There's very few places in the world today, maybe North Korea, maybe Cuba, where there is still some residue of the old idea that there was an alternative to market capitalism. I also think this, and I'm going to state this dogmatically, and we can argue about it. in the period of the Cold War, the consciousness of the West was that there was this great enemy, the Soviet bloc. And this was not altogether illusory. There was a great enemy. And it was a very, though in those days, I think the West was freer than it is today. And of course, the Soviet bloc was very unfree by comparison. And so there was a threat. This threat was exaggerated possibly because people were not aware of how fragile the Soviet economy was. But still, there was this genuine sense that there was some alternative to the market capitalism and democracy. Now, I happen to take the view that once you have market capitalism, there's a very strong pressure for democracy. And I think we see this in the world today, and we could go into that if anybody is unconvinced. Now, that's my general framework. So one thing I would say there is we do not have to fear the rise of some great power, which is inherently hostile to market capitalism and political democracy. That's not going to happen because market capitalism is the only way to have a rise in living standards for the masses, and it's the only way to have an effective war-making machine, if that's where your tastes lie. And given that there is going to be market capitalism because there is no alternative, there is going to be strong pressure for some kind of democracy. Now we see today in Russia, we see a very considerable amount of democracy, and the amount of free speech in Russia is less than the amount of free speech in Europe or North America, but the gap is dwindling all the time. In China, we have a system which is very democratic at the local level, very undemocratic at the higher level, the national level, and has been described as political meritocracy. Well, that is promoted by Daniel Bell, who is an American, or maybe originally Canadian, I'm not sure, but a North American expert on China, who spent many years in China, and he recommends that system, but I'm unconvinced. I think ultimately China will face a challenge from more obviously, conspicuously democratic forces. So that's my background. Those are some of my background assumptions. People in the United States have become accustomed to the US being top dog in the world. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, people exulted in the fact that a bipolar world, bipolar in both senses actually, had given way to a unipolar world. And that they thought this was wonderful because they assumed that their own side was motivated by nothing but the milk of human kindness, and that now everything would be peaceful and wonderful. And this increased the sense that America could do anything. So they could bomb a country and nobody would say, oh, that's an act of piracy or an act of terrorism, because obviously it would be being done for the good of the world in general. And most people in the United States wouldn't question that. But anyway, we have to remember that all the time that these developments were going on, United States output as a share of world output was declining quite rapidly. So that it follows, it seems, that United States power and influence in the world must decline. the current ruling class of the United States still talks and acts as though the United States rules the world. Not that it would be a good thing if the United States rules the world, although that is implicit, but that the United States does actually rule the world. This is the way that they talk. And Donald Trump is merely, in his current manifestation, it's merely a crass statement of what the way the US ruling class, people we call the neocons, think. And they think, and it's a gut instinct with them. They think, they believe it, and they're attached to that view. And so it seems obvious that if there's any trouble in the world anywhere, the US can barge in, use military force, get its way, and there will be some kind of improvement. So let's turn to this idea of regime change. We're now engaged, the United States is now engaged in a war with Iran, which the United States is quite clearly losing catastrophically, as indeed I predicted immediately. But no, I don't claim any particular wisdom, because everybody who knew anything about it was predicting this. And the President of the United States was somehow persuaded not to listen to the competent experts, but to listen to people who were somewhat less well informed. But anyway, in this war, it was conducted in order to carry out something called regime change. So, in fact, the idea of regime change is an ambiguous one. On the surface, it apparently means changing a form of government that we don't particularly like into a form of government that we do particularly like. So in that sense, it means converting a foreign country against the wishes of most of its inhabitants in every case, into something more like a Western style democracy. So that's one idea. And a lot of people still think like that. I think if we look at behavior and not at what people say, but at what they do, I think it's clear that regime change has a completely different meaning. And that is the maximal spread of destruction, impoverishment, collapse, and chaos. That's the intention, and that's what is pursued by the proponents of regime change. So, for example, if you look at Libya, Colonel Gaddafi gave up weapons of mass destruction, prostrated himself before the demands of the United States, and said, well, we're not going to have nuclear weapons and anything like that. So, of course, the United States invaded, devastated the country. The whole place is a total mess. Living standards have fallen, and the country has degenerated into competing rival groups of gangsters. It was the most promising country in Africa. It is now just about the least promising country in Africa. And that was accomplished by the United States with some allies, and Britain was cajoled into coming along with that mission. Now, was that a failure because they didn't create a Western democracy, or was it a success because they created chaos, destruction, massive suffering, death, and general degeneration into a disorganized rabble? I think we could say that was a success by that standard. Another case would be Syria. Again, destroying what was a reasonably robust kind of polity that did have certain merit. The Assad regime was, generally speaking, more tolerant of a range of different religious views, for example, than almost any country in the Middle East. But they've replaced it with factionalism falling apart, terrorism, just group rivalries, military rivalries, and so on. It's a mess. And of course, from the standpoint of the first definition of regime change, that's a failure. But from the standpoint of the second definition, it's success. That's what they want. And I think in Israel, this is quite openly proclaimed. They just want death and destruction all around them. In the United States, people are a bit more muted about it. And there is the idea of there's still the lingering idea that somehow a democratic Western style system may emerge, although it never has. This has never worked from that point of view, but it's worked from the other point of view. So, by the way, this system of this stratagem of trying to bring about death and destruction for its own sweet sake, this can be defended rationally. Because if you're engaged in international competition, it seems to make sense to destroy any power that might rise to challenge you. So there is a rational thread here. And this is clearly what motivates the ruling circles in the United States. I would say, I don't think, you see, let's suppose that Iran were to, against the deep-rooted convictions of 99% of its inhabitants, was to say, we want Western democracy in all its glory. Well, of course, this would be regarded as a tactical success, but it would be regarded as the beginning of a process. Immediately, Mossad and the CIA would move in, would create through NGOs and all the usual, the color revolution and all that sort of thing. They would try to destroy that system and bring about the same kind of system we have in Libya and Syria, just total chaos and falling apart. That would be the ultimate goal. And the fact that it was a Western democracy wouldn't affect people in the slightest. They wouldn't pay the slightest bit of respect. So that's what we have in the world today. So so what's to be done about this? Well, I would say, first of all, I would say that if you're Iran or any country like that, you must get nuclear weapons, plenty of them and soon. And if you're any country in the world that the US starts making demands on, develop nuclear weapons. The United States will never attack North Korea for one reason and one reason only, because North Korea has nuclear weapons. So that is a deterrent. Iran has behaved very irresponsibly in being, for religious reasons, against the development of nuclear weapons. If they had developed nuclear weapons, as they easily could have done, Iran is a country of 93 million people with a very high level of technological expertise and scientific knowledge. They could have easily developed a whole raft of nuclear weapons. And then all this terroristic activity by Israel and the US against Iran would never have happened, because Iran would be like North Korea. It would be untouchable. So I would say any country in the world that might possibly have the United States poking its nose in and telling them how to run things, that's the signal. You have to develop nuclear weapons. Now, of course, Iran, being such a big country with so much technological expertise, has been able to develop missiles. And one of the things that's happened in recent decades is the development of missiles which have tremendous potential as weapons without the use of nuclear at all. And this has been very good for Iran. That's the reason that one of the essential reasons why they're winning this war. And so that's all for the good. This is one of the things that is equalizing international relations. So my conclusion from all this is we need to prevent the United States from conducting its affairs on the basis that it is top dog, that it rules the world. Most countries in the world, believe it or not, never attack any other country. Iran has never attacked any other country. North Korea has never attacked any other country. It's only two countries in the world which keep on year after year attacking other countries: Israel and the United States. They're the only two. They are the two terrorist gangster states which are now running rampant all over the world, and that's got to stop. The United States must be persuaded to stop doing that and to start conducting its relations with other countries on a basis of equity. Now, this will happen very, very slowly because of a process of education. It should happen, one would think, because of bitter experience. The present war has been a total and ignominious defeat for the United States. And you would think that this would educate them. But I don't know about this. This is until recently, I never gave a thought to the question of what happens with declining empires. Is it always the case that they're totally deluded and think they can retain the power they used to have instead of adjusting to the reality that they don't have that power anymore? And the only way that they can be educated is by terrible wars. You would think that even Vietnam would have given the heads up to some members of the US ruling class that there might be a problem with this approach, but it didn't. Or if it did, it was only for a few years, and then after 1991 there was this whole exuberance being a unipolar system. But somehow we have to assume that the ruling class is not totally isolated from the rest of society. So we must have discussions like this where we state the truth fearlessly and forthrightly in the hope that future generations of members of the US ruling class will learn the lesson, and the US will acknowledge its declining status in the world. So I think I've probably said enough to stimulate some discussion.
So may I follow up with one of the key points about nuclear weapons?
Mm-hmm.
So Iran should have nuclear weapons, so some other country won't invade them or mess with them.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of helps stability, like paradoxically. So do you think, by the same token, Ukraine should have nuclear weapons?
Well, okay. There's a question of, in principle, yes. But since I think that Ukraine won't exist for more than 6 months, it's a sort of academic question. I mean, I think that Ukraine has lost the war with Russia. Whether Russia is going to be predisposed to keep Ukraine, I'm inclined to think that the present opinion in Russia is that Ukraine should continue to exist, but it should be, as it was before the American interference, committed to neutrality, committed to not being part of NATO and so on. So that's what I think probably will happen and probably ought to happen. Now, I have to say, against that what we've seen in Russia in the last couple of years is the increasing volume of critics of Putin's go slow approach. And there are now leading Russian politicians who are saying that or implying strongly that Ukraine should cease to exist. It should just be incorporated into Russia. For various reasons, I'd be inclined to. My own opinion, which it doesn't count for anything, but my own opinion would be that it would be better to stick to their traditional position, which is that Eastern Ukraine, which never was part of Ukraine historically, speaks Russian, has been persecuted viciously, and not just persecuted, but bombarded with cluster bombs by the Kiev regime, that they should be allowed to join Russia. Well, they have joined Russia by referendum, and then confirmed it's part of the Russian constitution. And in fact, it wouldn't be within the power of Vladimir Putin to undo that. He would fall from office if he tried to. But there would be a rump Ukraine, and it's the exact dimensions would be up for negotiation and partly up for referendum of the local populations. But so I would tend to favour that. But we're well past the point where anybody would ever give Ukraine nuclear weapons, right? I mean, the West has stopped giving them even. Well, the West has played a double game. They've been sponsoring Ukrainian terrorist attacks on Russian installations, civilian installations, but at the same time they've been cutting off the spigot of the flow of finance and arms into Ukraine. So that's the situation right now, I think.
So wait, what was the answer? Should Ukraine have nuclear weapons?
Because
I didn't get clean an answer from that.
oh,
Is there, are you saying you don't know, or you're not answering?
I don't think Ukraine should have nuclear weapons.
You do not.
Although
think
in
that? Because
principle,
at the beginning you said
in principle,
Wait, in the beginning you said in principle they should.
Yeah.
But now you're saying they should not. So it's okay to say
well,
you
I mean,
don't know.
I mean, to have nuclear weapons is not something that happens by snapping your fingers, right? So let's look at that question. Would it be a good idea for the Kiev regime to, at this point, start developing nuclear weapons? I would say it wouldn't be a good idea. Because they lost any nuclear weapons don't protect you against the overwhelming force of the Russian.
So earlier you had said that Iran, without hesitation, you no hemming and hawing, you said Iran or any other country that is threatened by the US should immediately take steps to get nuclear weapons. But it took you 10 minutes or so when asked the same thing about Ukraine to hem and haw and say no, because Russia has overwhelming power.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused. I think it comes to the crux of everything that you talked about for the last half hour, where you have different, there's no consistency.
Oh, it's all totally consistent, but you're just
okay. Please explain how it's so important for some countries to have nuclear weapons, but for others it's not important.
Okay, I'll try to.
Because they're all equally at threat, right? Russia can invade, the US can invade. In fact, you've said that the US and Israel are the only ones that have done any sort of bombing or invading forever. If Russia is, Russia is not a threat because they haven't invaded anything, right? So I'm just looking for a straightforward answer and consistency.
So what's the question?
How do you explain your inconsistency on those two?
I don't think there's an inconsistency.
Of course there is. I just demonstrated to.
No,
that
you
there
didn't.
is.
No. If we were to ask the question before the United States started subverting Ukraine with the Maidan coup and things like that, should Ukraine have nuclear weapons, it would be a sort of, yeah, I would say in principle, yes, because they would then be able to stand up to this subversion by the United States. But I mean, in principle, any country that is likely to be invaded by a big country should have the right, should develop
So
nuclear
Ukraine
weapons.
should have kept their nuclear weapons.
But
In the early nineties, Ukraine should have kept their nuclear weapons. And
in the early 90s, Ukraine did not have nuclear.
yes, they did.
No,
Well, with the Soviet Union, they made a deal with Russia after the dissolution of the Soviet Union
right.
to give up their nuclear weapons on the condition that Russia will never invade Ukraine. And what happened? They held up their end of the deal, and Russia did not hold up their end of the deal.
Yeah, but that was in the matrix of NATO would not go an inch forward, and they kept going inch after inch.
Okay,
So,
so,
no,
okay,
wait, I'm
wait,
not.
You're done or not, Vic?
Like,
I think,
you do this thing where you just keep interrupting, you just
You're gonna
gotta
get
stop,
very
let people
emotional.
talk.
Yeah, he does
Let people talk. I get emotional when people do bullshit like they keep.
we all know
interrupting,
each other
right?
very well.
So
You were interrupting.
here's the issue, man.
Like, one
Like,
at a time.
You don't get to say, like, this is my argument, and if I'm monopolizing David's, I bow to the supreme leader. But here's my thing, like, you don't get to say, well, they agreed to give up the nuclear weapons if they weren't gonna get invaded, and then they ended up getting invaded, so like, didn't they go back on their word? It's like, okay, but NATO also agreed, in that whole matrix of things that was going on, NATO also agreed, we're not gonna move NATO eastward, and they did. Once they did that, everything else is on the table as far as I'm concerned, so there's no inconsistency there. And then to David's point, I'm glad you brought it up, to David's point, it's like, before we started meddling in Ukraine, where now Ukraine is effectively an outpost of the American Empire and not Ukraine, like, we talk about Ukraine as if it's its own entity, like it's a sovereign state, it's not a sovereign state. It's an outpost of NATO, it's an outpost of the American Empire. So like, should an outpost of the American Empire, should an outpost of NATO have nuclear weapons when NATO has been aggressive towards Russia for decades now? Like, no, I don't think so.
Did I stumble
There's no-
into an Antifa meeting?
Ivan already.
Horseshoe theory.
Is that an ad hominem informal logical fallacy?
No, I would recommend that, we're taking such, we premise our arguments on facts that are in dispute. I mean, you're claiming that Ukraine is an outpost of America.
Yeah.
Some people don't, so then arguments based on that are kind of get ridiculous. Okay, this is my point. I heard the speaker, label. This is another area. We're talking about huge complexities with labels. We're talking about countries that doesn't take into account the independent politics of these national entities. So you got done labeling the US, and I don't speak as an American patriot here that's offended. I'm just, an analyst like you guys, as a terrorist and a gangster state. I don't think that's, I don't know what facts you base it on other than the contemporary history. Under one regime, President Trump's regime. Thinking back to, the Obama deal with Persia, I think there's consensus that it worked as far as neutralizing that one country's efforts to make weapon-grade nuclear armaments. And of course, there was side issues on the side that it didn't address, and it was ripped up, and where we're in the war that we are at, with us labeled as terrorists. And I just think the internal politics of the United States is such that over the last 4 years, maybe the last 10 years, that we're in kind of a democratic crisis. But remove it, thinking more globally now, to your other position that countries should be allowed to have nuclear weapons. I think there's UN agreements out there, but I only reference them in the point of the human consensus that these weapons are tremendous. And looking at a regime like Iran that has no problem butchering 45% of their own people, and espouse the eradication of the Israeli state, whatever your opinions are on that, to have such a weapon, you can see why the general humanity that encompasses UN votes says maybe that isn't a good idea. A country, on the other hand, like unified Germany, which is a functioning, well-respected democracy that has checks and balances, maybe, they're a type of country that doesn't fit that Iranian model. Because their government does act, responsibly on the world stage. And to them, it is legit. You don't see Germany aggressive on an imperialist level, except last century. And they're being brushed, by this imperialist state, or arguably imperialist state in Russia. So they might have legit self-defense reasoning. So that's my point. Nuclear weapons, we have to recognize as human beings. It's a thing that illuminates the stars. And have somebody with that type of power, a madman, including our president, is not something that we should. We all of humanity has a stake in that decision. And if and I think the world, led by the West, but even joined by our, enemies, if you will, have reached the consensus that, hey, we can't allow nuclear weapons. We will intervene in things that when we think nuclear technologies are crossing the borders, because we don't want them in the hands of terrorists. But I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm curious about one thing you said, and that was about Iran disposing of 45% of its population.
Oh, I said 45,000, and I obtained that data. I realize it's kind of recklessly factual coming from Trump speaking at the podium, but the estimate range is from 30 to 45,000 of the present Iranian regime slaughtering alleged protesters in the last 6 months in their efforts to try to empower themselves politically with a say in their future.
Okay, so you think they slaughtered 30 to 40,000?
What's the number? What's the number?
But that's my basis of facts.
I heard it was closer to 75.
Of course, I cannot investigate it, but it's coming from my administration, which I don't buy anything of, but independent sources in the mainstream media, which I find credible, like The Economist, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, things that are respected in journalism is where I draw my sources.
Let me fill in one thing, just to fill in some information, as a factual information about the nuclear weapons. After World War II, I think it was in the law, somewhere in the UN charter or somewhere, Japan and Germany, because they're defeated in World War II. If you're defeated, you're a criminal, right? If you're a winner, you're good. So Japan and Germany, they are not allowed to have nuclear weapons or atomic bombs. And UN charter is against, it's illegal for a country to attack another country, use force or threat of force against another country, except a few things. Except number one is their attack first. So they should go through United Nations Security Council to resolve any issue. Any kind of use of force or threat of force is illegal. But if Japan or Germany have nuclear weapons, that constitute one of the conditions that other nations can attack them, especially the UN permanent member of UN Security Council, like China will very much want to do it, if Japan should have nuclear weapons. So that's one thing. Another piece of law about nuclear weapons or disqualify people from having nuclear weapons is a non-proliferation treaty. If you're the signer and sign that you're not going to have nuclear weapons, if you have nuclear weapons, you're against international law. So those two laws are the bare minimum against people having nuclear weapons or countries having nuclear weapons. And also nuclear weapons, there's a practical matter. That's what we're discussing or debating right now. But another thing is, let's not lose sight of the danger of nuclear weapons. Like Ivan mentioned, some madman can push a button. There's tremendous, disastrous damage.
I know, we bad Netanyahu did that.
Yeah. Also, the nuclear weapons could fall in wrong hands because no one can guarantee, especially more some countries than others, the stability of it or lack thereof. So if the government that established nuclear weapons or acquired nuclear weapons went down, replaced by something else that's a little bit out of control, that's danger to the world. So let's not lose sight of that. That's what we put nuclear weapons on the side on itself to consider as opposed to other types of weapons. So David, do you have some response to the?
Well, I think, you see, let's take the case of Libya. Libya voluntarily gave up all and proclaimed loudly that it was giving up all attempt to develop weapons of mass destruction. As a result, Libya was invaded by the United States, and its culture was ravaged, and its economy was ravaged, and it's in a terrible state. If it had developed nuclear weapons earlier, the United States would never have attacked Libya. It would have. So nuclear weapons are a deterrent, and so that's my point, really. You know, in principle, I mean, you see, there are these different ways of putting it. Should they be allowed? Well, who is doing the allowing? The United States doesn't get to allow countries to do this or that. The United States is one country among 200. It's absolute insolence and arrogance for them to start saying what they allow. But is it? I'm not saying, you see, and this is where I think our friend here, Alex, I think his name is, got hold of the wrong end of the stick. I'm not saying it's always a good idea for any country to develop nuclear weapons. What I'm saying is that developing nuclear weapons can be a useful deterrent. And countries, there are many countries in the world which I think may be the object of hostile American intentions that would be very well advised to develop nuclear weapons. One of them is Iran, although right now, of course, might be a delicate time to do it. But certainly Libya and Syria, if they had developed nuclear weapons, they'd be in much better shape. Lots of people, lots of lives would have been saved. Lots of appalling atrocities would have been prevented. And the world itself would have a higher economic output. People would be healthier and happier in those countries, simply because they would have the deterrent to American attack. And I would say the same thing about any other power that might start attacking people, including if they want to do that.
Okay, Calvin next. Calvin, Ernie will be next. Calvin first, please.
Yeah, you say that, and I can see your point that Iran would be better off, perhaps with nuclear weapons and maybe Syria and stuff like that. Apart from one very salient point, that there is already a nuclear power in the area, and Iran has got an avowed aim to drive that country into the sea. And you're not taking into account what Israel would do in response to them getting anywhere close to having nuclear weapons. You know, I mean, I can take the sensibilities of anti-Zionist sensibilities 100%, but you have to take into account the Zionist sensibilities. And if Iran got close to being able to drop a nuclear bomb on Israel, Israel are not going to stand for that. Simple as. They're not going to wait around for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon and try to attack their country. They're not built that way. There's a few things I've disagreed with you on. You talk no more third world nations. Well, tell that to the people of Venezuela and Malawi and all the other places that have been devastated by the World Bank rigged game that is International Monetary Fund. Far be it from me to contradict an economist who wrote his before the invention of the steam engine. But we have a different economic system than we did in 1776. All right. But you're not saying, and the fact that the other speaker said The other question said, you're saying only Israel and America have invaded. Well, Russia's invaded as well. Russia's invaded. We say Ukraine, but in other guys, Afghanistan, Georgia, Chechnya, it's not exactly been a shrinking violet when it's come to invading other countries. And as for the Ukraine war being over by in 6 months' time, well, this is about the third Christmas that war's supposed to be over by. Would you like to put $10 on it?
I didn't catch that last question. What was the question?
Since you said that the Ukraine war is going to be over within 6 months, and this is about the fourth Christmas it's supposed to be over by, would you like to put $10 on it? Because at the moment, Russia last month lost 34,000 casualties. 96% were killed before they got to the front line.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Go on.
Do you have any doubt that Ukraine is about to lose the war?
I think Russia's losing men, like that. It's hemorrhaging men in a meat grinder, and I think it's probably going to stalemate until regime change in Russia. Probably.
I agree.
It's Russia's fate now.
The idea of regime change in Russia. Did you look at the election returns of the last Russian general election?
Yeah, and they were published 2 days before the election.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Putin, rightly or wrongly, has adopted a go slow strategy, and he's done so in order to minimize loss of life, especially Russian life. And I think that that's actually a wise policy. That's my view.
Well, how many casualties do you think Russia has suffered in this war?
Oh, less than 200,000.
Think again. Times that by 6.
Yeah,
over 1.2 million so far.
No. This is a technical question we could go into. I think that's quite wrong.
Well, the figures I know, it's over 1.2 million.
It's wishful thinking. It's wishful thinking.
Last month they had 34,000 casualties, Russian casualties.
Are you talking KIA or WIA?
Both. Off the field casualties. Non-competent.
Because I think Russia had 125,000 KIA in Finland in 1939.
Yeah. But how long did the Finnish war go on?
Not that long.
This has been going on for 4 years now.
Yeah, this one's longer.
Yeah.
Can I get on and make a few comments here?
Yeah.
Moderator?
Go ahead,
Okay,
Bernie.
all right, yeah. A couple things. On nuclear weapons, this is always an important issue. There is an old saying about nuclear weapons, according to countries who wanted them. As soon as you have them, that's fine, but you can't use them. You can almost never use them because as soon as you do, you will be a victim of nuclear weapons. And this is largely true. This has probably prevented us from having any nuclear war, any use of nuclear weapons since 1945. It'll remind people that when nuclear weapons have only been used once in wartime to destroy and kill people. That was by the United States against Japan in 1945. And the major situation there was that only one country had them. Only the U.S. had them. They did not have to worry about nukes coming back their direction. Now, that changed rapidly in the next few years. And fortunately, nuclear weapons have not been used since. But the unstable situation is a situation where there's not parity. And I agree with David. Iran should be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Actually, I wish nobody had nuclear weapons, but since they're there, There's an arrogance to think that only we and a few other people can have them. Anyone who wants to protect themselves should have it. And in the case of Iran, they're probably the country in the world that needs them the most, because right there is where that instability exists. Iran doesn't have them, and an enemy, Israel, does have them. That's a very dangerous situation. If Iran had nuclear weapons, everybody says Iran would immediately bomb Israel if they had nuclear weapons. Of course they wouldn't, because if they did, they would become a nuclear cinder. Okay, the mutually assured destruction may not always work forever, but it would certainly work in a case like this. Iran is not looking for self-destruction, so if they had the nuclear weapons, they would not use them. Would Israel use them? I think it's quite possible. I don't know. I hope not. I think right now Israel doesn't feel the need to, because they have so much more conventional military power over Iran. They don't need to. But that is an unstable situation, which would be more stable if Iran had nuclear weapons than if they do not. Ukraine's a different situation. That takes probably could create more dangers with having them. Now, the reason there's a problem in Ukraine is because the United States did not live up to the security guarantees that they gave Ukraine. I believe it was 96 when the Budapest Memorandum was signed. I'm not sure right about that time. And in fact, I think the US and Great Britain and Russia guaranteed Ukraine that they would not, if they gave up their nuclear weapons, they would have security guarantees. Well, the U.S., being the country with the most lawyers, came up with a very lawyerly answer there. They used the what was the word? Assurance rather than guarantee. Apparently, there is no word such as assurance in the Russian language. That's what I have heard. And so when they was translated into Russian, they considered it to be a guarantee. And unfortunately, by trusting the United States and not realizing that the United States is mostly run by lawyers, they're now in a certain amount of trouble. The argument can be made that some of these parts of Ukraine should go back to Russia. Crimea has gone back to Russia. They have about a 75% Russian population in Crimea. However, I've heard a lot of different things about this. I wish Art would get up sometime and give a good talk on this, because he has a lot of information. But the studies that I have seen still say that there's a substantial majority of Ukrainians in eastern Ukraine, and we hear about this plebiscite, and you don't hear about it very often, and you hear about the people being forced at gunpoint to go to the polls and stuff. I don't know what the situation is there, but that is definitely a tough one. Why the United States won't help Ukraine? I'll go back to my Helsinki theory, which I may have mauled once or twice, and that is basically that Putin and Trump, when they met in Trump's first term in Helsinki, they met with only for a couple of hours, only with their interpreters. And I believe that they made an agreement at that time that Putin gets Europe and the US gets the Western Hemisphere. And I haven't really seen anything since then to really debunk this theory. And there's some major points, including the fact the U.S. is not really giving any aid. Trump has withdrawn all aid. They will in fact sell weapons through Europe with Europe's money, but that's about it. They're leaving Ukraine on their own. Who's going to win that war? It's going to be a long stalemate. Okay, and will Russia be able to outlast Ukraine? Maybe. They've got such a huge population base, and the Russian leadership doesn't seem to, as has been a tradition in the past, they don't. They count their own people as just one form of ammunition. And as far as the issue that nobody but the US, by the way, I agree that the US and Israel are the most arrogant and most dangerous countries in the world today. But David, you said they're the only countries that attack anybody. I assume you're meaning after World War II, because before World War II, there were lots of countries attacking each other. Even since then, Russia is still doing some attacking. China over the years, now maybe not since World War II, has done some. They attack other nations and are threatening militarily. Pakistan and India seem to be attacking each other. Who's starting that? I don't know. North and South Korea, of course, that's maybe somewhat in the past, but we do frequently see countries attacking each other, whether it's significant or not in terms of a world picture. I don't know, but yes, I agree with the U.S. arrogance. I don't know how to solve it, and especially when you've got a guy. We were the most arrogant country in the world even before Trump, and now we've got Trump. My God, that just adds fuel to the fire. And where that's going, I'm not sure. I hope that in the November elections will soften Trump's power a little bit, but we don't know. And the Israeli elections, which are supposed to take place in June, or pardon me, in September, but people are saying June, that will be very interesting because if the Israelis will throw off Netanyahu, that would be wonderful. But people don't tend to throw off leaders in wartime and when they're being threatened, even though the public polls seem to indicate most people do not like Netanyahu. I'll stop there and see if let
Yeah,
other
let's see
people make
what
some
David
comments.
can continue on that as far as prediction. Is
Yeah,
Ernie raised a lot of good points, but those are open ending. Let's have our speaker David continue on that. Like, how do you think the Middle East situation, specifically Iran war, how is it going to end? How's the Ukraine war end? And what comes after that, particularly in the U.S. and Trump administration?
Yeah,
In the medium term future.
my reaction to sort of where the discussion starts to hive off into all kinds of different things is to try and let's get specific about some of these things. So I would say if you look at the war in Ukraine, forget where your sympathies lie and just look at it objectively. It's been a long time since the Ukrainians made any advances against the Russians. Every day, the Russians are gaining in the territory they control. In the early stages of this war, the Russians were attacking well-defended positions. I mean, when I say well-defended, I mean concrete embattlements. I mean, really serious alterations in the landscape that were meant to be impregnable to a Russian advance. And the Russians initially found that very slow going. But recently, they've basically routed the Ukrainians everywhere. They now have more or less total control of the Donbass, which was so well defended. It's difficult to see unless some new element enters into the situation, like Trump has a brainwave and decides to give tactical nuclear weapons to the Ukrainians. But I don't think that would even work. Unless something amazing happens, there has been for many months now inexorable, steady, uninterrupted Russian gains. The front has been moving more and more to the west.
We're in year 4, though.
What's that?
We're in year 4 of, you know.
Right,
some-
but
They predicted
the
it would
pre-
last a week.
right, but the evidence of the past year is the Russians keep on making advances. The Ukrainians keep on retreating. It seems to me that is going to continue. And I mean, until there is a point where there is collapse of the Kiev regime, which could happen. But even if it doesn't happen, it just means the Russians will eventually get to Kiev.
How about Moscow's regime?
But what about Moscow's regime? I mean, Putin has like 85% approval in polls conducted by Western agencies. I mean, you know, it's the Russian regime is extremely secure. I mean, there are countries like Syria was one, which you can have this attitude. Oh, if we attack them enough, they'll collapse into disorder. But if you have millions of people who are united by patriotism, that's a very formidable force. Iran is not going to collapse because, as you can see from the election returns, I mean, the last election in Iran was won, let's remember this, by a proponent of democratic reform who was opposed to the extreme amount of power that the religious authorities have. The president, what's his name? Bekian, whatever it is, right? He was elected by 53%. They have a runoff system, much like the French system, where you keep on eliminating candidates until there's just two of them, and then they have. And he won by 53%. He's a Democrat. He's a critic of the religious part of the Iranian constitution and wants to see an increase of democracy. He's utterly 100% behind the IRGC and these other religious organizations because he's a patriotic Iranian who doesn't want his country to be destroyed. And any doubt that anybody in Iran might have had, President Trump's, I would say it was evil, except that it's more like idiotic. His threat to wipe out the Iranians. I mean, it's, you know, if in international law, when you're trying to try people for genocide, the hardest thing is to show genocidal intent.
Right.
But Trump has made a speech which proclaims genocidal intent. I mean, I must say that I used to be one of those. I'll make a confession. I used to be one of those who always tried to find an interpretation of Trump's behavior that would make it rational and intelligent. But recently, that's become an impossible task. I give up. Now, it could be that, I suspect we're dealing with a cognitive challenge here. And I also, by the way, since this has come up, I would say that it's 60% likely that Trump will stand down before November. I think he will be able to see that you know, if he is president and the November, it's clear only a miracle can prevent the loss of the House and the Senate. That means that Congress is going to be absolutely eaten up with a passion to A, impeach Trump, and B, to investigate everything that Trump has ever done. He should have some glimmer of insight to be able to see that, right? Although I think will go very much against his self-image to step down, I think he probably will step down before November. But anyway,
Wait, step down like as in
To resign the presidency.
Resign the presidency. So
Yeah.
you think it's one thing to be impeached, you think he'll be removed from office?
No, you say you
I think he would,
voluntarily
don't you?
like
No,
Nixon.
if the Democrats make gains in November, you think he'll actually be removed from office?
I think so, yeah.
Not possible.
I think it'll be a successful impeachment. I mean, I think
It's one thing to be
given
impeached.
Trump's recent behavior, I think a lot of Republicans would vote in favor of removal from
The
office.
only, it's one thing to be impeached, he's been impeached twice already, it's another to be removed. from
Right,
office.
that's true.
The
That's
standard is much higher, or
Yeah.
the bar is much higher.
Right, I agree, yeah, but I,
So,
no,
yeah.
I,
So,
no, I,
Trump, I mean, going forward for this country, for United States of America, instead of Trump, who will lead this country forward? In what direction? That's better than Trump.
Eric Swalwell,
Anybody,
Probably do so.
right?
anybody. for me.
no, no,
I
I mean,
mean, let's be more concrete. If you have like top two guys, can we elaborate?
He was,
I mean, I think, I believe that, given Trump's recent behavior, people will be actually seriously alarmed at the prospect of this guy having his finger on the nuclear trigger for much longer. I think there'll be a general, by common consent, there'll be a rebellion of Republicans.
Dead man holding
know.
a knife.
I know.
Gonna go use the bathroom. I'll be
Go
right
ahead.
back.
Go ahead. Could you guys repeat? Kind of missed it. Kelvin, did you say something?
I just thought I want to put on chat there. I just looked up. This is the most independent I can get. BBC News put it at 4,700 square miles gained by Russia in 2025. That's about twice the size of Moscow. That's against 55,000 Ukraine casualties versus 160,000 Russian casualties. So I wouldn't say that's an awful lot of gain in 2025. Not for 160,000 Russians. Something that's, twice the size of Moscow. It's not an overwhelming gain. So I think we have to be a little bit careful when we're talking about victories either way here in Ukraine. Everybody has said it's going to be over by Christmas for 4 years now, and it's obviously not.
Obviously not what? It's not going to be over by next
Not
Christmas.
over by Christmas.
Well, it hasn't been over by three Christmases, that's true.
I have one thing to follow up with.
Vic, he just, it's the same.
I was just gonna make a brief point, the 30,000, I've not heard it go up to 45,000, like in a month, it's gonna be 450,000 protesters were killed or something. I don't know, the number seems to keep increasing, but, I found in researching this a few weeks ago, I found, that at the Ron Paul Institute, they reposted an article from the Gray Zone. At the Gray Zone, it was posted on February 1st, and at the Ron Paul Institute, it was posted on February 3rd. It's called "Meet the Former Fashion Blogger and Shady Doctor Behind the 30,000 Dead Iranian Psyop." Originating in Time magazine on January 25th, the dubious 30,000 claim was quickly amplified by The Guardian, a key voice of left liberal London respectability. From there, European officials seized on the death toll to justify designating Iran's IRGC as a terrorist organization, essentially greenlighting another U.S.-Israeli military assault on Iran. So I don't trust that 30,000 number for nothing. I think Alex was asking, like, well, what is the number? I don't know. Fog of war, don't know. I'm not sure when we'll know, how we'll know, what sources are going to be reliable for it. But that 30,000 number, I think, is probably bogus. The other thing too is, you can argue one way or the other, like, oh, were they protesters? Were they just fighting for freedom and democracy and all that kind of like heartwarming stuff? Maybe. But the moment you start taking up weapons, I would argue you are no longer a protester. You are a combatant or a rebel or an insurgent
Or a Mossad agent.
or a Mossad agent, right? So one of the things I heard recently from a Mexican last name, young Gen Z podcaster on Rumble, is that we actually gave weapons, or Mossad did, or whoever gave weapons to these protesters through the Kurds. that the Kurds gave them weapons, and that actually, the Iranian security services lost quite a few people. I think it was like maybe in the hundreds, possibly, that they lost quite a few people in their security, like the IRGC and the other authorities and stuff like that. So if that's happening, that's no longer a protest.
So you're saying there's
different thing
the
entirely.
crackdown would be justified if
What's that?
the crackdown would be justified if large groups of people are protesting with weapons with the intent of like toppling a regime or protesting regime.
I'm not even going into the question of whether it's justified or not. I'm just disputing the language, because like half of winning a debate is like, you know, as like relinquishing the
Well, I
right
guess I'm trying to figure out if you have like a real position on this, other than saying like it's other than saying that because it's like left-wing media, don't believe it, but what you're saying that essentially when if these people were armed in some capacity and when protesting Iran, you wouldn't see it as like an atrocity, say if Iran cracked down and killing a bunch of protesters.
If you are armed and using those weapons, you're not protesters.
Would you say
I'm
the
not
same
going
things
to-
for would you say the same things for the people on January 6th?
Were they armed?
Yes.
How many of them were armed?
Well, the exact number they would
Right,
well,
right.
how many Iranian people were armed?
If they were being fed weapons, if they were.
And how many of the
if
Iranian
they
people were
being-
breaking into the building of our government?
If they were being fed weapons through the Kurds, then that's not a protest anymore. Like, if, for example, I don't know, hypothetically, January 6th, like, you know, Russia was giving the J6ers a bunch of weapons so that they could take the capital. And then in that hypothetical scenario, wait, hold on, then in that hypothetical scenario, then maybe the government would be like, okay, maybe justified might be too strong, but you might be like, I can see why they did that, right?
Would you call January 6th more or less of a protest than what happened in Iran?
I'm not as familiar, I would say more of a protest than what happened in Iran. 100%.
Yeah. What would you call
I mean,
the Boston Tea Party?
That means you don't believe that. You think that Iran's was more of a protest than the J6ers, you know, that was an insurrection and they
Yeah,
overtook
I do.
the Capitol. What's that? It was not an insurrection. If you want a really good debate about that, you should look up Glenn Greenwald versus that idiot with Destiny, that motormouth running his mouth Destiny. They actually had a really good debate. It's completely fake news garbage that it was an insurrection. There was never a serious attempt
False
to like there was never a serious attempt, and I don't want to derail the
Okay,
multipolarity.
fine. I was just curious if there's double standard there, which it seems there is.
There is.
I'm curious if you were talking a lot about like Iran having nukes. Is your position that the U.S. and broadly the West is wrong in preventing nuclear proliferation, not only in Iran but like in a lot of other areas of the world?
Yeah.
And that the region would be
Oh,
more stable if Iran had nuclear capability. Just want to make sure.
I think that this war wouldn't have happened.
Well,
And,
but do you think, I guess the question is, do you think it's wrong? For example, like when we bombed like those enrichment facilities, or when even going back, when we try and make deals with Iran to not have nukes, like under Obama, do you think it's wrong to try and prevent nuclear proliferation?
I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I mean, I would say that Iran went to great lengths to comply with the JCPOA, and I think which was agreed to by President Obama.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be objecting if that had remained in place. I mean, Trump in his first term,
Yeah, it did. But
you know, didn't call for adjustments here and there. He just
yeah,
pulled out of the JCPOA. I think that was absolutely terrible, and it was a terrible piece of vote catching because various.
I definitely think that Trump was deranged in doing that. But I'm curious, like even now in the world where that's gone, is like, for example, is something like bombing those enrichment sites. Do you think the U.S. should not be like trying to prevent Iran from getting nukes?
Yeah, I don't think they should have tried to do that. You know, I mean, the problem here is that there is a context here, and the context is that, in my view, if you look at the back and forth between the US, largely dictated by Israel, and Iran, it was quite clear that they didn't want to have a sort of workable agreement with Iran. They just wanted to.
Yeah, certainly Netanyahu and Trump. I
Right,
don't
right.
disagree. I don't,
Right,
yeah,
well,
yeah, I don't disagree with that, right? Yeah, like the current regime of the country, but I'm curious, like,
I mean,
but you know, I guess the worry, I feel like we're kind of pretending that Iran is also not aggressors in other regions of the area and wouldn't use the leverage of having a nuclear weapon to, you know, say, put more
what
pressure on the
does
Strait
that
of
mean?
Hormuz.
Especially in other regions of the area.
Hezbollah?
Yeah, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, like to name a few, and probably some things in Syria too. That
Oh, you're talking about
Like
the
state
fact that,
sponsored.
oh, I see, that's a different thing altogether. You're talking about the fact that the resistance to Israeli genocide is supported by Iran. Well, it's supported by anybody with the faintest speck of moral decency.
So what the
Anybody,
Houthis,
Anybody,
the Houthis
it's
like
supported
blocking
by
trade
90,
routes
it's
and
supported by 90% of the world's population.
I don't think Hamas and the Houthis are supported by 90% of proliferation.
Not those specific entities, no, but what they're doing in resisting and
So you think that
retaliating.
the Gulf states and other say Iraq, Saudi Arabia, like those more opposed to Iran, should they have any cause for concern with Iran gaining nuclear weapons?
Not if no one attacks, not if they don't attack.
So it's your thesis that Iran would be completely peaceful should they have
Oh,
nuclear
absolutely,
weapons?
yes, I
And
think that's very clear, yes, they would be totally.
That looks to me too.
But you know, if they get them, there's the incentive of the other Gulf states to get them too, and it just spreads that
Well,
desire to get
I
them.
think my tentative conclusion, I'm not an expert on the Gulf states at all, but by following what's been going on since February 28th, has led me to the conclusion, which I'm quite tentative about this, is that these Gulf states don't have long to live. I mean, they are extremely delicately poised. Let's suppose this present war starts up again, all the ceasefire stuff evaporates, and Israel starts attacking Iran, and Iran starts attacking Israel. Iran has made it clear they issued a list of these installations in the Gulf states that they would destroy, and we know they can do it, and there is no defense. There is no defense against Iranian missiles, none. Partly because the West has run out of the interceptors. But anyway, the interceptors didn't work. They worked initially because Iran has this practice when they're being attacked of using up their old obsolete missiles first. I used to think this was like a kind of charming custom. And then I realized, because I learned more about it, that these solid fuel missiles, they do degrade over time. So if you have them around too long, they lose their quality. So you want to use up these old ones first. Iran has been in the forefront of missile technology. When the Ukraine war started, Russia was importing the drones from Iran because Iran had the best drones in the world at that point. Now the Russians quickly improved them, and now the Russians have the best drones in the world. Maybe the Chinese, I don't know. But the Russians and the Chinese are way, way ahead of the West in military technology. That's one of the facts we have to take into account.
Speaking of facts, I think it's a consensus that Iran just suffered through a colossal bombardment that human history has never felt before. If we take nuclear weapons aside, artificial intelligence, space bombers.
I don't think that's true. I mean,
Germany and Japan were one.
Right.
yeah. I think.
Well, I mean, my point, just to fine tune it, the bombs being dropped now seem to hit their targets. That didn't occur as far as payload in Vietnam, World War II, or any other period of human history. They just got hammered by the two best air forces with volume, unlimited amount of bombs to use whatever you need. Iran, and you're telling me that they're in good shape right now. I don't think so.
Well-
I think they're playing their cards really well.
Good shape is not how I would choose to characterize it.
They're
I
right.
would say that they're taking a pasting. It's nothing like what the Germans took in World War II. Nothing approaching it. I mean, whole cities were destroyed. You know,
But that's in the
prisons.
But I
military.
mean, but right now we're just, like my understanding is that like right now we're avoiding bombing that like that, where's that key energy center that like gives all the energy, what is it called?
Long Island.
Mark Island.
I think like that key energy center in like Iran, because like if we like escalate to that point, then they'll probably bomb all the energy centers around there, and then at that point everyone has to clean up for years, and it's a total disaster.
I think you are talking
Like,
about Long Island,
so, like-
they bombed like military stuff there, but they.
Yeah, they leave the
didn't
power
do-
infrastructure alone for now, because
Yeah.
if we attack the power infrastructure there, then Iran attacks the power infrastructure.
Those aren't
on those states.
military targets, you know, it's not an
No, but I
attack
mean, I
against
guess-
the
I guess-
Iranian people.
I know, but I guess the point being is that it seems like Iran's goal right now is to create as much chaos in international markets to the point where Trump
Right.
becomes
Sure.
unpopular.
They're playing their cards really well.
Yeah,
Today, they closed the straits again, you know.
yeah, but I guess, my question, like, I'm coming back to this, like, say that the issue in Israel and Palestine is resolved, say that Netanyahu is ousted in his election, say that somehow Gaza and the West Bank come together, and an election is held between them and the leader, and along with maybe the US, like, figure out like a solution to that. But, and then say Iran gets nuclear weapons, do you think Iran will do nothing to attack or hinder Israel in any way, or continue to support anything there?
As long as Israel doesn't attack them.
So,
But
okay, so
it's
there's,
not, but it's not, that's not what their policy is. Their
Yeah.
policy is to drive Israel into the sea.
yeah, they seem to not want, they want the destruction of the Israeli state, and they're pretty clear about
Well,
that.
I want the destruction of the Israeli state.
What would replace it?
The single Palestinian state, of course.
And do you think that the Jews there and other ethnic minorities, like the Jews and the Druze, and a few other ethnic minorities have no cause for concern if that were to happen with Iran being a nuclear power?
Do you not
If they
think,
have innocent intentions and behave themselves, they have no cause for concern.
I mean,
do you not think-
wouldn't you say it's like at least reasonable for, like, especially the Jews, to have like apprehensions about being a minority in states in this region?
Well, they should have thought of that before they started committing mass murder on a
Well,
spectacular scale.
before that.
But no, I mean, whether, you know,
Yeah.
they have reasonable grounds for concern. I mean, I think we will see the end of the state of Israel. I think it's inevitable. And I think it will be replaced by, maybe not instantly in one stage, but several stages. It will be replaced by a single Palestinian state in which Muslims, Jews, and Christians will all be tolerated and protected.
What type of government?
Yeah.
Well,
and will they all be seeing
I don't even think Iran states it's their
I would
position.
prefer it to be a
Okay,
democratic.
Calvin, let's hear Calvin.
I mean, you think that they're all going to be seeing kumbaya? Do you think Israel's not going to have a word to say about this? Do you think that they've been trying to push Israel into the sea since 1947?
What does
It ain't
mean?
gonna happen, my friend. It ain't gonna happen. Whatever your morals are, whatever your moral standpoint, whatever you think should happen, right? The reality is that they've been trying to push Israel into the sea since 1947. It hasn't happened. It ain't gonna happen. There is, and especially since it's America's stronghold in the area, it ain't gonna happen, my friend.
Well,
It means the same thing that you just said. You want the destruction of the Israeli
the
state.
destruction of
on the abolition of the state of Israel, yeah.
That's what.
That's the decision. Yeah, that's what
the sea means. The
And there'd be no cause for concern for any sort of collective punishment or any sort of issues with like Jewish people in minority Arab countries like there have been
No, we're not talking about Zionists. We're talking about Palestinians. Palestinians have never shown the slightest proclivity to that sort of behavior.
Iran has.
Just another question to the speaker.
These are in the region.
You keep on talking about genocide in Israel, and I'm not a Zionist, right? I have friends who are Zionists. And I have friends who are not Palestinian, who support the Palestinian cause. So I can see from both sides. My question is, what would you say would have been an appropriate response to October 6th, this October 6th attack?
Well, I think that October 7th was totally warranted. I think it was reasonable retaliation against
Which
a
part of it?
genocidal state.
Leveling of Gaza.
No, wait, you're saying October 7th was
So-
a reasonable and justifiable retaliation to
What's
Israel.
it getting at you?
So what was Israel? What would you say that Israel got everything it deserved and shouldn't have retaliated in the slightest?
I don't think Israel has ever had everything it deserves. I mean, you know.
Right. Okay. All right.
A lot more is to come.
All right. I'm speaking from the UK. Can you imagine a situation where Mexico was doing the same thing to America and then you guys not responding at all? When you look at the response that America made against the 9/11 attacks, the disproportionate response, and you expect Israel to do nothing. I was against the attacks on Gaza, mostly because I actually think Israel has a right to exist, and this was a bad decision on their part.
Did the Third Reich have a right to exist?
Yeah, let's not go, I'm
Did
sure.
the Third Reich have a right to exist?
Within Germany, yeah, as soon as they went into the Sudetenland, then all bets are off. Just in the same, oh, by the way, using the same excuses that Putin used to go into Ukraine.
Did the Soviet Union have a right to exist?
Yeah, until they invaded Finland, in which case all bets are off.
And what has Israel got to do before all bets are off?
They
Have they got to invade Syria, for example?
They already have.
Or Lebanon? If they invaded Lebanon, would all bets be off? And incidentally, if they invaded Lebanon by attacking purely civilian installations and avoiding an attack upon Hezbollah, because they always lose in their encounters with Hezbollah. So they decided to just bomb housing and hospitals and schools.
There's a lot of news. There's a lot of news that doesn't make the mainstream media.
So
right?
This
is before the October 7th attack, right? The Hamas in Gaza were tying booby trap bombs to helium balloons and letting them go, and they were landing in Israel, and Israel had to make up a little rhyme so that children wouldn't play with them and get killed. Now you don't get that, and I'm not saying there isn't atrocities on both sides, right? I'm not, there's no white hats in this scenario.
I would just like to, I think maybe we're all like crisscrossing around this type of subject matter, and I'll try to be articulate here. October 7th, the state of Israel, it could have been any people, okay? The state of anybody. You got your population bombed, they get their throats slit, your population, you get your kids kidnapped. That's an act of war. We all realize Israel or any country sitting in their standing in their shoes has a right to attack and do what they have in the ambient in the backdrop of what's called self-defense. Now, where the problem where I go, and I know I probably may be joined by several of you guys, is okay, you responded. Did you really have to level the city of Gaza? Do you really have to cause all these type of collateral damage that makes 1.5 million refugees that lost their home? They somehow got to survive every night. So it's a matter of, can you please use a little more depth in your response? Right-wing Israel. I'm not done with my point. Now, let's fast forward to the recent war here. Okay, we have there's suspicion that Iran is enriching uranium to make, and they have enough to make 6 dirty nuclear bombs sometime soon. Okay, what do we do? Let's get them on the table, let's negotiate. First of all, we should have never ripped up that Obama pact, but we are where we're at. So what do we do now? Trump rejected his advisors in the US government, according to the left-wing New York Times expose of what happened in his decision-making. He listened to right-wing Israel and the opposite him and Bibi. And Bibi's agenda in the last 40 years, as we all know, has been to try to destroy the Iranian regime. So he got the big superpower to do his bidding with this present president of ours. And so again, we were facing the dilemma. What do we do? Do we do something like leveling Gaza? And we were faced with the same type of decision making with what we do with Iran, and we decided to go to war. There's where we are right now. Now what do we do? I don't know. It's a really tough one. We may have to land boots on the ground.
Whatever it is, I don't trust Trump.
I'm not saying, what do we do? The status quo is 20% of the, I'm not advocating for it. I never advocated for this war.
Israel.
But we are where we are.
No more.
Can I remind you what America's response was to Pearl Harbor?
What do we do now? That's
Pentagon, even Pentagon, plenty of generals saying
we got. Well, let me finish this one. We got a blockade on Iran. It seems like 80% of their commerce is effectively blockaded. But blockades are going to take time, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and they are, I assume, are going to do something similar to the flow of traffic in that Strait of Hormuz, which knocks out Asia pretty well. I mean, they have a quite effective stranglehold. Their own nuclear weapon, as we all know, strangling the Strait of Hormuz. To the world, of course, all sorts of collateral damages are actually friends of Iran.
I don't believe the rest.
Can I just remind?
Especially East Asia, they're not gonna sit down and let it happen. What's it called? They're not gonna take it lying down. The Strait of Hormuz, however it's closed, other country out of necessity, they'll find a way around.
Okay, but
They're
it
not
might
gonna
be 2
take
months
it
before we get an
lying
army
down.
down there. You know, that's the whole
So my
point.
question is, well, what I see is, however the detail is gonna happen, number one, Pentagon already said, well, not that has said, but plenty of generals take the position that any ground action to Iran is gonna be disastrous for the US. So if that's like, if 60% correct, plus the things are not going that well, otherwise.
It's costly.
Right, so the US is gonna try to exit rent from the Iran situation. So my question for everybody, including David, is in the intermediate term, is US gonna what's the percentage, what's the likelihood that US will retreat from Middle East, also retreat from Russia in order to focus on East Asia and Western Hemisphere? Is that a viable scenario? Like from the US standpoint, let's go back to our own country to focus on the future. Is that a likely scenario? I think it sounds like cleaner. It's kind of more rational, and it kind of shows a little bit in the national security strategy document publicized in December. I can see that in there. Of course, we're not gonna put 100%
Just a quick.
prejudice on it, right? But well, I'm throwing out the question. What do you think of that scenario?
I'll be quick, guys. Ukraine will already effectively independent, as described. We're selling arms. Maybe we will not sell arms in the future, but this is the Trump administration. And that's we gotta be square about that. But as far as our relationships with the Middle East under Trump, yes, we may very well withdraw because mission accomplished. The enemy of Zionist Israel has been effectively conventionally destroyed. And we will mow their grass, as they say, whenever those nuclear progress is shown as far as weapon making in Iran. That's probably going to be the Trumpian strategy. That's my guess.
Okay, I have a few little observations. Cyrus Jansen, who is quite right, he reacted to Trump's statement that the Iranians hold no cards by saying they not only have cards, they have a straight. Okay, you have to be a poker player.
Yeah, I like that.
You see, I think that in a perfect world, Trump would appear and say, I apologize for my many serious blunders, and we have to accept defeat in this war with Iran. They have beaten us fair and square. We're going to shut down all our bases in the Middle East and withdraw all our troops from Middle East, Africa, and Europe, for that matter. And because of this humiliation which I've brought upon our country, our great country, I have to resign the office of president. And then Vance would take over and he would begin by saying, I will not run in 2028. That to have any credibility at all in that situation, it's got to begin with that. And then he would say, yes, we've withdrawn from the Middle East, and the US is not the boss of the world, and it has to accept that its comparative position in the world has declined, and we've been far too belligerent in the past, and we will now try to mend our ways, and so on and so forth. It won't prevent them being slaughtered by the Democrats in 2028. I'm quite sure of that. But still, that would be one way. Now, of course, that's not going to happen. And Trump has this ability to say things which are not only false, they're almost surreal in their audacity. For instance, recently, Trump has been saying, and defenders of his have been saying, well, we've executed regime change because we killed all the leaders,
Right,
and
you just said that
we have new people replacing them who are much more congenial to and accommodating. Well, of course, they did kill all the leaders, and they were replaced by people who are much more determined and hard-nosed and open to the idea, which the previous leadership was not, of developing nuclear weapons. So what a great achievement. But anyway, so Trump wants an off-ramp, as they keep saying, and that's, I think he does. He wants an off-ramp that can be dressed up for the American public as a victory, which is a hard, that's a hard task to fulfill. But Trump will try to carry it up. But I mean, I think we have to face the fact that Trump is now toast politically. He has no prospect of making a comeback from this.
One thing I was going to say about the October 7th is one of the sources that I look at on a regular basis, Fox Day, like pretty much immediately, he was saying that it was a green flag. So if you've ever heard of the concept of a false flag, it's where like entity A strikes entity B and makes it seem like entity C is responsible for it, right? A green flag is entity A strikes entity B. Entity A is the one responsible. They're not trying to hide it or conceal it. But people who could have stopped, like maybe leadership or whatever, they could have stopped. They could have done things to stop entity A from attacking, but they didn't. They let it happen.
That's 9/11.
They knew they could get mileage from it. And you know, it wouldn't surprise me at all if that happened, because if you just think about it, you know, just the general thing about like, you know, like with Netanyahu in October 7th. So like it's the most heavily surveilled piece of real estate in the entire planet. They've got a wall. They've got, you know, Palantir facial recognition for everything. Like they're listening to everything, and paragliders came in and did all this stuff.
I gotta say, the more you think about it, the more
so there's that, number one. And then like I didn't even know he was a Zionist until I looked into it, but who's the guy who's most famous for that expression, never let a good crisis go to waste? That'd be Rahm Emanuel, right? Rahm Emanuel, he's Zionist, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, what if you don't just have a crisis drop out of a tree that you can pick up off the ground? You shake the tree a little bit, maybe, right? What would shake the tree look like for October 7th? You see something coming, you know you can get some major mileage out of it where like you're gonna go with your Greater Israel Project, you're gonna like flatten Gaza, you're gonna do all this stuff. And by the way, Greater Israel Project, that's not like a conspiracy theory or anything. Like their soldiers have patches that have like a symbol of the real estate of what, you know, the Greater Israel would look like. And Israel's ambassador to the United States, he's not the US ambassador to Israel, he's Israel's ambassador to the United States, Mike Huckabee. He was in an interview with Tucker Carlson, and he pissed off a lot of people in that region when he said, because he came up with that standard stupid line, does Israel have a right to exist? And then Tucker flipped it, and he said, well, what does that mean, and where would that right come from? And then Huckabee was a little bit on the back foot, and then he had to talk about the Bible, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, but the Bible, if you go by the biblical geography of what they are entitled to, so other sovereign countries already have that territory. So what you're saying is Israel would be taking territory from other sovereign countries. Like, this is insanity bullshit like that. Like, I bet they manufactured or at least allowed to happen a crisis that they would not let go to this.
I believe that, and I take the stand that both sides are bad people. So US should get the hell out of Middle East and Western Europe for that matter, Eastern Europe for that matter, and focus on China, Eastern Asia, and Western Hemisphere. That's what they should do. And over time, they're wise up. They're gonna retreat from Asia, focus on Western Hemisphere, and I think the world will be a better place that day.
But Eric, I know that's like very wishful thinking. I mean, all of Western Europe gets a primary source of their energy from that area. And that's same with Asia.
From Russia.
No, from the Middle East, from the Middle East. So to say
They
that,
can get it from the US. US
how do you withdraw
on the
from
track,
that?
right?
US is on the track to have multiple, I'm not gonna say sources, but logic, the sources of the logic. The US is transfer, the US after World War II is manufactured industry power. Then it shift to financial power, Wall Street. Now it's on track to become energy power. So it wants Greenland, it wants Panama Canal, it wants Venezuela, which it already got, right? So if Middle East is destroyed for a while, because if Iran and the other what's the CCD, the Gulf country, CCG, if they bomb each other out of nothing, they lose the capacity to produce oil. So who's producing oil now? North America. Who's controlling North America? United States and Russia. So the United States will become an energy power that to control the world. That way. Without having a lot of troops on the ground, military bases on the ground, which proved to be vulnerable. The military bases, a lot of them were built during Cold War, the Middle Eastern part, but we can refer to other military bases in West Pacific. They're vulnerable too. So those are obsolete in the new 21st century kind of military conflict. They're liabilities. They're not useful. They're vulnerable. They're there to scare people. But when people feel existential threat or they have nothing to lose, those military bases are cooked. And Pentagon knows it. So they're better off. Just give it up, find an off-ramp, get the hell out of there, back to East Asia. Maybe they can gain something out of it, prolong their hegemony, if you will, for a little longer, and ultimately focus on Western Hemisphere. Those countries are pushovers, and so that's I think for Americans, I think that's for our best interest. So as to how do we get out of this situation like Israel first, as opposed to America first, that's a big one. But Epstein has been out of the picture for a while, so all those dirty things, there's something on Trump, something on Melania, something on this and that, it'll expire for a while, because those people are old. The next generation, they can start all over. So that's a scenario for moving from Israel first to America first. That's a long term. It's wishful thinking. It's a good thing. Otherwise, why would I wish for it?
Right, it's good to have hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this idea of green flags and it's just a very naive outlook because it kind of shows it's just an ignorance of how the intelligence community works and how defense works among the developed countries. So there's, and I used to work in the intelligence community. I had top secret clearance at one time, and my job was to get cables. This was around 9/11, before 9/11, and we would get cables from around the world in the middle of the night. My job was to just route them to where they were supposed to go. So for months and months, I was getting these cables saying Al Qaeda determined to attack the United States using airplanes, blah, blah, blah. So I can, I mean, somebody could take that information and say, oh, that was a green flag because the US knew, quote unquote, knew it was going to happen. No, you get reports and chatter from all over the world constantly, 24/7. And this was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. You don't know what's true. You don't know what's not. You just pass the information along to the higher ups. Unfortunately, we had an incompetent Bush administration at the time. They weren't paying attention. They didn't take it seriously. And so 9/11 happened. So that was a failure.
Maybe that's part of the green flag. They ignore it on purpose.
No, there's no evidence of that. They didn't ignore it.
I know there's
They
no
were
evidence.
just occupied with other dumb
If
stuff.
there's
Yeah,
evidence.
a good case in point is the Germans had the Normandy plans. There was a I think it was a Hungarian butler in one of the embassies that stole all the plans for Normandy in 1944 before the landings, and they gave them to the Germans, and the Germans didn't believe them.
Exactly. Yeah, that was happening in World War II. It's still happening.
Very
Yeah.
sus though.
When it's talking about appropriate responses, I was reminded of the American response to Pearl Harbor, which ended up with the flattening of Tokyo and two nuclear bombs. So if we're talking about appropriate responses, and if you're talking about the annexation of land, can I remind you guys how you got New Mexico, Texas, and California?
So you mentioned appropriate responses. I'm not sure what that means. And this idea that there's international law, there is no such thing as international law. There is
No,
just.
I'm just saying, if you're talking about appropriate responses, America's eventual response to the attack on Pearl Harbor was the flattening of Tokyo, the flattening of Nagasaki, the flattening of Hiroshima.
What's the question?
When your previous questioner was talking about Israel's appropriate response to the October 7th attack, the eventual response of America to Pearl Harbor was the flattening of Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki.
There's no appropriate, you just neutralize the threat. Like when a police officer,
Exactly.
people say, oh, you should shoot him in the leg or whatever. No, you neutralize the threat. You kill the threat. Whether
I mean, as I say, I don't see any white hats in the house. I don't see any white hats in this. But one thing I didn't see when everybody was saying that Israel should stop bombing Gaza, I didn't see a lot of posters saying free the hostages, which probably would have stopped the bombing the next day.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I feel like, I mean, the way I see it is that like a lot of the closer you get to October 7th, like the more justified Israel actions seem to be, especially as they deal with Hamas and as they, as much as people don't like to think about it, they did take a lot of measures to prevent civilian casualties. But as the war continues dragging on, and as Israel achieves more of its goals, and as Hezbollah's crippled, and Hamas is crippled, and everything's crippled, Netanyahu becomes less and less justified, and then the ultimate truth is revealed that Netanyahu is an expansionist opportunist that will take advantage of anything to expand Israel and settlements. But And you can acknowledge that reality, but what I think happens here too much is that we're pointing to the atrocities of Netanyahu, and then like using that as some sort of an excuse to say that like the people those atrocities are against, or they're Israel's enemies, are all like good faith actors who will like with nukes be entirely peaceful and put no pressure on the Jews in Israel, or put no pressure on the Strait of Hormuz or any American interests in the Middle East. Like I think that's kind of ridiculous, and to the point where people are saying that, oh, you should just withdraw from everything in the Eastern Europe and the Middle East, but there's pretty important trade routes there, important resources there. If Iran has nukes and they say, okay, we're going to keep our, what is it, $5 billion like the cost of moving through the Strait of Hormuz, or we're going to stop all you from moving through the Strait of Hormuz. At what point is military action justified to prevent economic collapse of your civilians? Like, it doesn't make sense to just withdraw from everywhere, because that's pretending that once we withdraw, everyone's going to be all peaceful and happy and not, try to take action in revenge or just like ideological difference against the West.
Maybe there will be peace when US withdraw.
Is that like, okay, if we withdraw, if we withdraw and there's no peace, what do we do then? What do we do then? If Iran continues to close the Strait of Hormuz, or or if action is taken against the Jews,
you mediate.
We have no leverage to mediate, because we have no military presence or no control at all.
We have no position to mediate anything because we're Israel first. Okay, Ernie, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of comments here on a lot of things that have transpired in the last little while. Somebody said that maybe it was Kelvin said that as a result of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. flattened Japan. I think that's an oversimplification. Pearl Harbor was merely an invitation, or shall we say, putting away the blockade of you don't want to attack somebody without reason. Japan was flattened because of all the other things they did in starting with the rape of Nanking and the going down into Oceania and taking over all those areas, and a lot of things that they did. Those were the main reasons, I think. As far as the knowing what was going on, in terms of October 7th, there's lots of circumstantial evidence, in my opinion, some very strong evidence that, number one, the Israelis knew it was happening, and number two, Netanyahu knew it was happening, and maybe even wanted it to happen, or did some things to make it happen, because of course in Netanyahu's case, he doesn't want the war to end. Everybody else wants the wars to end. He doesn't want to, because as soon as the wars end, he probably goes to jail not too shortly thereafter, and maybe is booted out of office. We can't predict for sure, but probably. So he wants the war to go on, and at that point things were peaceful enough that he needed a war. Netanyahu is the main guy there that needs a war, and he therefore is acting accordingly. The evidence is this. There was a detachment, an IDF detachment of female soldiers in a small base right on the border with Gaza. And their job was to monitor the border. We've all seen pictures of these huge 25 or 30-foot towers with TV cameras and machine guns on them. They were monitoring the TV sets along the whole border and reporting back. They reported to their superiors that there was a lot of strange activity going on in Gaza, and probably there was going to be an attack. And they said this many times to their superiors. They were always told, oh yeah, okay, thanks for the information, we'll take care of it. Which to me gives a lot of evidence that the Israelis knew it was going to happen, and perhaps even wanted it to happen. And they knew there'd be some cost to them, but it would give them the right to destroy Gaza, and also possibly to go into the West Bank and give the settlers more rights, etc., etc. I mean, Israel is basically looking for Lebensraum, if y'all remember that term from some decades ago. That's what they're looking for, and they were given the invitation to do that, I think, by the Israeli government. The Israeli government should have taken actions against October 7th. And as I say, I think there's a lot of evidence that they knew about it. Now, as far as Netanyahu and his gross overreaction in destroying Gaza, I think he's just basically laying a foundation for the next Holocaust. It won't happen in my lifetime, quite possibly not in the lifetimes of anybody here. But the next time somebody wants to do to the Jews what the Nazis wanted to do with the Jews, they will have hours and hours and hours of video and evidence as to what the Israelis did during this time period, and that will be used as justification for an attempt at another Holocaust. And I think a lot of Jews realize that. American Jews that I talk to, of course, are mostly very much against what Netanyahu is doing. And even the polls that I hear are they're 50 to 75% of the Israeli population of the Jewish population are against what Netanyahu is doing, even though usually in wartime people gather behind their leader for better or for worse, and we're seeing a little bit of that in Iran. But in this case, Netanyahu is so out of control and so off any sensible track that people, even in his own country, are very much.
We're short on time. Can you wrap it up in 1 minute?
Yeah, I can. And in fact, let's just say that's all that I have to say for now. I'll have more to say depending on what everybody else says.
I have a quick question for you, Ernie. What was the source of the female IDF on the border? I'm being serious. Like, is it just something random that you heard, or do you have a source?
Most of those ladies were killed because they were right there. And when the Hamas came in, they encountered these military. One of the other pieces of evidence, there was almost no Israeli military presence down there, and one would think even if there was nothing suspected of happening, that the Israelis would have fairly heavy military presence along that border. They did not. There was relatively few there, except for these people that were monitoring the border, and.
Okay.
In fact, let me finish up to answer your question. A lot of them were killed, but of the ones that did survive, many of them have been interviewed. Of course, they're trying to be hushed up by both the Israeli government and the U.S. government, but they have been interviewed on TV. What's her name? Amanpour, for one. I'm not sure if 60 Minutes did a segment on that, but there were a lot of these people were interviewed. These ladies were interviewed several times in not right after October 7th, but reasonably close. And then, of course, we haven't heard much about it since.
So you do not have a source.
Does anybody else remember? Well, these.
Okay, that's convenient. Let's do our kill. I think that's the implication of future is very little. So we have the only last 7 minutes. I will pose a question to David because it didn't cover it. We can't let him go without having him give us some answer, which is he gave us the title. How can we best educate our ruling class? Did you mean that, or did you mean it as a figure of speech? Can you give us something that we can bring home, or we can bring home as a wishful thinking, or something we can work on as a political action plan?
Okay, let me just say this, Alex. I'm puzzled as to what you meant by saying there was no such thing as international law.
We have 195 to 200 sovereign states, nation states in the world,
Right.
And none are bound by international law. There have been a few examples. ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the other organization that have tried, quote unquote, warlords like Milosevic, but that's maybe a half dozen times or something. Other than that, there's no such thing.
I see his point. The major countries, especially permanent members of Security Council, are not bounded.
Yeah,
It's
that's
only smaller countries, the medium countries, they're accountable,
enforcement mechanism, so no one ends up caring.
right?
Well, there are lots of people who don't think that.
That's
any
You
That's a
obey,
jungle,
watch,
jungle
that's about
kind
it.
Yes, okay.
So I
I
stated,
I was just
please,
curious about that. I think
Yeah.
there is such a thing as international law.
how do
Anyway,
we
but
change
anyway,
our government? How do we?
Yeah, yeah.
Let-
No, when I was a raw youth, I thought we could abolish the ruling class. But I've not so raw. I'm now not so raw. And I think there will always be a ruling class. But I think what we can hope for is a ruling class in touch with reality. And I believe the present neocon ruling class in the US has lost touch with reality. And they've lost touch with reality because they think they rule the world. They think they can decide what happens all over the world, and they can intervene to bring things into conformity with their desires. Now, there is the question of whether this is absolutely inevitable, and I've heard some people say that all declining empires are like this. They always miscalculate. They always do stupid things. I think from the point of view of United States aggrandizement or United States ruling class aggrandizement, they've been doing a lot of things that are stupid and ill-conceived from that point of view, not making any exterior moral judgment at all, but just saying from the point of view of the ruling class of the United States, their welfare, they have done things which have not worked out too well. So there is that question of whether this is an inevitable part of any declining empire. And the US is a declining empire. And that's, for reasons I've given, that's absolutely inevitable. Day by day, the United States becomes a little bit weaker because other countries in the world, their relative power in every way, including military, compared with the United States, gets bigger. And of course, if they all combine against the United States just wouldn't stand a chance. I'm posing that question. I don't know the answer, but I'm assuming that the ruling class in the US is to some extent influenced by the general culture of the United States. So in other words, I think discussions like this can help to educate the ruling class indirectly, not immediately, but in 20 or 30 years' time. So that's what I'm getting at when I raise this question. I don't actually know everything that's going to happen. Now I do. It does seem to me common sense that if the US ruling class keeps on facing disasters, that this will have some effect on their ideology, on their outlook. I mean, I grew up in the 40s and 50s in England, and I can remember being told back then when I was, in primary school and secondary school, I can remember being told, not to put it too fine a point on it, that the British Empire was over. And we were now in the age of the Commonwealth, where we had to cooperate with everybody and not try to rule the world. Now, I admit that was made easier by the idea that the United States was going to rule the world instead. And they spoke English, and so, or something that they claimed was English. We could be happy with that. But still.
So did the ruling class that lost the empire lose credibility?
They lost.
Or they're like different ruling class?
Just to be clear, in 1947, when I was 3 years old, the British ruling class quite deliberately gave up rule over India, Pakistan. Of course, India and Pakistan split at that point because Hindu and Muslim. Ceylon, as it was called then. They gave them their complete independence, and Burma as well. They gave them their complete independence. They invited them to remain members of the British Commonwealth, which means they recognized the king as their monarch, which all of them did except Burma. And this was quite deliberately giving up the empire, because India was always regarded as the jewel in the crown, as they said. So they did this quite graciously. Now, it was all helped by the fact that people like Nehru and people like Mountbatten, they'd all been to the same public schools. In Britain, public school means an elite private school, okay? And they were all lefties who'd been to public school. And the same public schools. So in a sense, this smoothed the passage. But it is possible for an empire to give up power gracefully. So I'm encouraged by that, although maybe it isn't possible for the US ruling class, I don't know. But one of the things that that influences me a lot is trying to face reality. The reality is that the US has lost this war with Iran. There's nothing they can do. We talk about boots on the ground. The boots on the ground will be boots without live bodies quite quickly after they arrive. I mean, we're talking about Iran here. We're not even talking about Vietnam. We're talking about the boots on the ground. US boots on the ground would just be slaughtered, and it would just add to the gravity of the situation facing Trump. So it's not going to happen, because I think he's going to be prevented from doing anything like that. The Iranians control are able to, people say, oh, isn't it terrible of the Iranians to create such havoc in world markets? Well, you use whatever's to hand. The US and Israel have been attacking the Iranian population. By the way, they've been picking out schools, hospitals, and all these civilian installations quite deliberately, and not looking for military installations, because they know they're deep underground and they can't get at them. And that's been their policy. It's been their strategy. And so the Iranians have reacted by retaliating with their superior missiles. And they've also reacted by seizing control of the Strait of Hormuz. And the US is completely powerless to break that stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz. There's nothing the US can do. We're talking about a blockade now. So they've got ships. By the way, when this war started, I said, oh, those two big battleships, the aircraft carriers, they're going to be sunk. Well, of course they weren't sunk, because the US quickly removed them 1,000 miles away, because they knew they'd be sunk if they were close to Iran. So any attempt, and by the way, any attempt to blockade, seriously, it's all pretense and mumbo jumbo and smoke and mirrors at the moment with Trump. You never get a straight, truthful word out of him these days. But if they were to enforce this blockade in earnest, then China would destroy those ships, because China wants that oil. And there's nothing the US could do about that, except start a nuclear attack on China, I suppose. But then, and who would say, I'll put that past them? So basically, I would say we need to cut out the gobbledygook and the CIA-inspired narrative and get to the facts.
Exactly. Getting to the facts, I think we need to.
So
Better relying from the mainstream media, frankly.
And I'm hopeful that this,
Yes.
It's so terrible.
All this ridiculous anti-education,
All these
anti-media, all this
conspiracies.
conspiracy, isn't it odd that like Israel and, you know, so.
Yeah, you know,
surveil-
mainstream media never lies to us at all.
Yeah, and alternative media, the basket of fruit with no.
On that high note,
Furious.
on that high note, let's thank Dr. Steele and thank you, everyone.
I'll just say that, the